They tried to ban me from fishing, so I bought the lake. Sounds unbelievable, right? But it all started with one quiet morning, me, my fishing rod, and a calm lake I thought I could enjoy forever. Then came the HOA, papers in hand, megaphone blaring, and a rule that said I was no longer welcome. They fined me, they threatened me, they tried to shame me in front of the whole neighborhood. What they didn't know was that I had a plan. A plan so wild, so unexpected, that it turned their entire world upside down. You see, I didn't just fight back. I bought the very lake they tried to take away from me. But trust me, that was only the beginning. Welcome, my friends, to HOA Max Stories, where we share the most unbelievable battles between homeowners and their associations. My name's John. I live in a small community here in the U.S. I'm just a regular neighbor who's been through some not-so-regular fights with my HOA. And today, I'm here to tell you one of the wildest stories you'll ever hear. Before we dive in, I'd love for you to join our community. If you're over 50, you know how HOAs can be, full of rules, drama, and surprises. So hit that subscribe button, it's like pulling up a chair on the porch and swapping stories with old friends. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? I love knowing which part of the country, or the world, my neighbors are tuning in from. It all started that morning, the sun had just come up, the air was cool, and the lake looked like glass. I carried my old fishing rod in one hand and my coffee in the other. For me, that lake was more than just water. It was peace. It was the one place where the world felt quiet, where I could sit, listen to the birds, and think about nothing. I set my coffee down, cast my line, and leaned back against the wooden dock. The smell of fresh grass, the sound of water lapping against the posts, it was perfect. For a few minutes, I thought I had found heaven in my backyard. But peace never lasts long when the HOA is around. I heard the sound first, the sharp crunch of heels on the gravel path behind me. At first, I thought it was just a neighbor going for a morning walk. But then came the voice. Loud. Sharp. Full of anger. Excuse me. What do you think you're doing? I turned around, and there she was. The head of our HOA. Bright pink dress. Big sunglasses. And in her hand, a megaphone. Yes, a real megaphone. She didn't even wait for me to answer. She lifted that megaphone to her mouth and shouted so loud the ducks flew off the water. You are banned from fishing here. This is against HOA rules. I almost laughed. I mean, who brings a megaphone to yell at one guy fishing? But she wasn't joking. She was furious. She waved a stack of papers at me like they were the law of the land. I said, "Ma'am, I've been fishing here for years." Nobody ever said a word. She shouted back, "Well, now we're saying it. No fishing allowed. You're in violation. You will be fined." I sat there with the rod still in my hand, wondering if this was real life or some bad TV show. I thought she'd calm down and leave. But no, she stood there, yelling, while neighbors started peeking out their windows. Some even came out on their porches, whispering to each other. That was the first time I realized, this wasn't just about fishing. This was about control. Later that day, I found a letter taped to my door. Big bold letters at the top, violation notice. They wanted to fine me $200 for unauthorized fishing. Can you believe that? Unauthorized fishing, in a lake that sits right behind my house. I crumpled the letter, tossed it on the table, and thought, alright, maybe this will blow over. But the next week, another letter came. This one threatened legal action. They said if I didn't stop, they'd take me to court. And just when I thought it couldn't get crazier, I got a notice saying my boat could be towed away. I couldn't believe it. All this drama, all this hate, over a man and his fishing rod. The gossip started soon after. At the grocery store, people would give me looks. At the mailbox, neighbors whispered. Some were kind and said, "We're with you, this is ridiculous." But they never said it loud. They were scared of the board. Others avoided me, like I was some kind of criminal. Imagine that. Living in a neighborhood where you pay fees every month, and yet you feel like an outsider just because you enjoy the lake. I'd walk outside and see people with their dogs, their kids, their bikes, nobody bothered them. But if I held a fishing pole? Suddenly I was public enemy number one. The worst part? The way they made me feel small. The head of the HOA, she didn't just say stop fishing. She shouted it, in front of everyone, like I was a child who needed to be punished. At night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I'd sit in my chair, staring at that crumpled letter, hearing her voice in my head, "You are banned from fishing here." Something inside me snapped. I thought, why should I let them take this away from me? Why should they hold all the power? That's when I started digging. I pulled up records online. I searched property maps, county files, even old HOA agreements. And what I found shocked me. The HOA didn't own the lake outright. They managed it, sure, but the actual rights were complicated. Messy. And in that mess, I saw an opening. A loophole. I can't describe the feeling when I realized it. My hands shook. My heart raced. What if I could take from them the very thing they were trying to take from me? The thought kept me awake for nights. I imagined the look on their faces, the silence after all their yelling, the power shift. Of course, it wouldn't be easy. It meant money. Lawyers. Time. But something about their arrogance, about that megaphone in my face, made me determined. And so I decided. I wasn't just going to fight them. I was going to outsmart them. That lake, the one they said I couldn't touch, might just end up in my name. And let me tell you, once that idea took root in my mind, there was no turning back. Now, here's the question, neighbors, if your HOA tried to ban you from something simple, something peaceful, something you loved, would you roll over and take it, or would you fight back like I did? Tell me in the comments. I really want to know. That thought stayed in my head all day, all night. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. The HOA might think they own everything, but maybe, just maybe, they don't own me. I started slow. A quiet evening at my desk, old files open, coffee by my side. I went through property lines, old deeds, anything I could find. The deeper I dug, the stranger it got. The lake wasn't even fully under HOA control. Years back, the original developer had split the rights. The HOA managed the community side, but there were private sections too. Forgotten. Unclaimed. And sitting there, in black and white, was my chance. Still, it wasn't easy. Every paper led to another. Every answer led to more questions. I felt like a detective in my own neighborhood. Sometimes, I'd walk past that lake at night and just stare at it, wondering, dreaming, if one day I could call it mine. But during the day, the war didn't stop. The HOA doubled down. More letters. More threats. They even sent someone to take pictures of me, like I was some kind of criminal. I could feel their eyes every time I stepped outside. At first, it made me angry, then it made me laugh. Because while they were busy spying, I was busy planning. Then came the board meeting. Oh, I'll never forget that night. I walked into the clubhouse. The room smelled like cheap coffee and old carpet. At the front sat the board, 5 people in a row, with clipboards, smug smiles, and eyes that burned holes through me. Neighbors filled the chairs, whispering, waiting for a fight. The head of the HOA cleared her throat. Same pink dress. Same attitude. "Sir," she said into her microphone, "you have been repeatedly warned. Fishing is strictly prohibited. If you continue, we will pursue legal action." The room went quiet. All eyes on me. I stood, hands in my pockets, and said, "You know, it's funny. You all act like you own this lake, but do you really?" Gasps. Murmurs. They didn't like that one bit. She snapped back, "Of course we own it. The HOA has authority over all amenities." I smiled, leaned forward, and said, "Then maybe you should check your paperwork." Because from where I sit, it looks like you're fighting for something that might not even be yours." The silence that followed was priceless. For the first time, they didn't have an answer ready. I walked out that night with my heart pounding. I knew I'd rattled them. But I also knew, if I didn't move fast, they'd try to crush me. So I hired a lawyer. A good one. Together, we dug deeper. More records. More files. Weeks passed, and every day the HOA grew more hostile. I'd get nasty looks at the mailbox. Notes left on my car. Even neighbors I thought were friends started avoiding me. But then, the call came. My lawyer's voice was calm, but I could hear the excitement. "We found it," he said. "The lake is for sale, and the HOA doesn't even know." I sat there, phone in my hand, trying to process. For sale? The whole lake? It didn't feel real. I asked him to repeat it. He did. And that's when it hit me, the dream I had, the wild idea that seemed impossible, was now sitting in front of me. Of course, buying a lake isn't like buying a car. It took time. Negotiations. Meetings. Money I had to scrape together. But each step brought me closer. And every time the HOA tried to corner me, every time they waved another letter, I just smiled inside, because I knew something they didn't. Then, one morning, the papers were ready. I signed my name. My lawyer shook my hand. And just like that, the lake was mine. I'll never forget the feeling walking down to the water that day. The same dock where she screamed at me, the same lake they said I couldn't touch, now belonged to me. I cast my line into the water, not as a rule breaker, not as a criminal, but as the owner. But here's where it got interesting. The news spread like fire. The HOA went crazy. Emergency meetings, phone calls, angry emails. They couldn't believe it. They stormed over, waving their papers, shouting their rules, but none of it mattered anymore. The law was on my side. I still remember the head of the HOA marching up again, red in the face, voice shaking. "This isn't fair. You can't do this." I looked at her, calm as ever, and said, "Actually, I can." And I did. Neighbors who once avoided me now came knocking on my door. Some wanted to congratulate me. Some wanted to fish with me. A few even asked if they could join me at the lake. And while I welcomed some, I never forgot who stood by me, and who turned their backs. That lake became more than water. It became proof. Proof that you don't have to bow down to people who abuse their power. Proof that sometimes, the little guy wins. But here's the truth, winning didn't mean it was over. The HOA wasn't done with me yet. They plotted. They schemed. And they tried to take back control in ways you wouldn't believe. And that's when the real drama began. Now let me ask you, neighbors, if you had the chance to turn the tables on people who tried to humiliate you, would you do it? Would you take the very thing they used against you and make it yours forever? Tell me honestly in the comments, because I really want to hear your answer. Owning the lake should have been the happy ending, but the truth is, it was only the beginning of a much bigger war. At first, I thought the HOA would back off. After all, the papers were signed, the deal was done. The law was clear. The lake was mine now. But when people who love power lose control, they don't just accept it, they come back even harder. The very next week, I found a new letter in my mailbox. Not one of their usual finds. This one was different. It accused me of disturbing the peace and creating an unsafe environment for residents. They claimed my fishing parties, my friends, and even my grill by the dock were somehow a danger to the community. It made me laugh, but also made me angry. I knew what this was. They couldn't touch the lake anymore, so now they were trying to come after me in other ways. Then the rumors started. People I'd known for years suddenly looked at me like I was a troublemaker. I overheard whispers at the local store. One woman said, "He only bought that lake to spite the neighborhood." Another added, "He's ruining property values." I shook my head, because deep down, I knew the truth. It wasn't about property values. It wasn't about safety. It was about pride. The HOA couldn't stand that I had beaten them at their own game. But I wasn't going to let them win this round either. So, I did the one thing they didn't expect. I opened the lake. Not just to me. Not just to my close friends. I invited neighbors. Real neighbors. The ones who felt suffocated by the board's endless rules. Families came with picnic baskets. Kids ran down the grassy banks, chasing each other. Dads brought fishing rods, and for the first time in years, laughter echoed across the water. It was beautiful. But you can imagine how the HOA reacted. They showed up again. Clipboards. Cameras. Angry faces. They marched up to me as I flipped burgers on the grill. The head of the board shouted, "This is unauthorized gathering. You're creating chaos." I calmly pointed at the water and said, "That lake is mine. And I'll share it with anyone I please." The look on her face. I can't even describe it. Rage. Shock. Defeat. She turned and stormed off while neighbors kept laughing and fishing like she wasn't even there. That day, I realized something important. The HOA could write all the letters in the world. They could hold meetings, spread rumors, even try to scare me. But they couldn't stop joy. They couldn't stop people from coming together. Still, their fight didn't stop. Soon after, I got hit with noise complaints. Trash complaints. They even claimed my dock was a safety hazard. Every week, it was something new. I started to see their game. They couldn't beat me on the lake, so they were trying to bury me in paperwork, stress, and false accusations. And honestly, it worked for a while. I felt tired. Worn down. There were nights I asked myself, was it worth it? All this trouble, just for a lake? But then I'd walk down to the water at sunrise, watch the mist rise off the surface, hear the soft splash of fish breaking through, and I'd remember. Yes, it was worth it. Because it wasn't just about fishing anymore. It was about freedom. Then came the moment that changed everything. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I saw a group of neighbors setting up at the bench near the lake. Families I didn't even know well. They were laughing, unpacking food, waving to me. One of them said, "Thank you. Without you, we'd never be able to enjoy this place again." That hit me hard. I realized this wasn't just my fight anymore. This was bigger. The HOA wasn't just trying to control me. They were trying to control all of us. And by standing up, by pushing back, I had given others the courage to do the same. But of course, courage doesn't stop bullies. The HOA sent me a certified letter. Thick envelope. Legal language. They were threatening to sue. Not about the lake, they couldn't touch that anymore. This time, they claimed I was creating a nuisance for the whole community. I read that letter 3 times. I should have been scared. Maybe I was, deep down. But mostly, I was angry. Because I knew their game. They weren't protecting the community. They weren't enforcing fairness. They were punishing me for refusing to bow down. I called my lawyer again. We went through every claim, every accusation. And guess what? Every single one was baseless. Lies. Desperate attempts to wear me down. So we pushed back. Hard. The HOA didn't expect that. They thought I'd get scared, back off, maybe even sell the lake out of frustration. Instead, I fought. Every false claim, every lie. I challenged. One by one, we knocked down their arguments until they had nothing left but red faces and broken pride. By now, half the neighborhood had taken sides. Some whispered support. Others cheered me openly. A few still clung to the board, but their power was slipping. The more they attacked me, the more people saw them for what they really were. And through it all, the lake stayed mine. Sometimes, I sit there on the dock at night, rod in the water, looking at the lights of the houses around me. I think about how it all started. Just a quiet morning with a fishing pole. And how it turned into this battle of wills. It's funny, the HOA thought they could scare me away. Instead, they created a storm they couldn't control. And still, deep in my gut, I knew, this fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Tell me this, neighbors, if your community turned against you, half cheering, half hating, would you stand tall like I did, or would you walk away just to keep the peace? I could feel the pressure building like a storm. The HOA had already thrown everything they could at me, fines, letters, threats, rumors, and yet, here I was, still standing, still fishing on my lake. That made them furious. And when people like that get furious, they don't back down. They double down. The lawsuit papers arrived one Friday afternoon. A thick envelope stamped with official seals. The kind of thing meant to scare you before you even open it. My hand shook as I tore it open. Inside was page after page of accusations, claims that I was lowering property values, disturbing the neighborhood, breaking safety codes, even endangering children by allowing fishing hooks near the water. I sat there in silence, staring at those words. Endangering children? For fishing? It was madness. But that's what they do, they twist the story until the good guy looks like the villain. My lawyer calmed me down. He said, "Don't worry, most of this is smoke. They're trying to intimidate you." Still, the idea of walking into a courtroom, facing people who once called themselves my neighbors, made my stomach churn. The court date was set. That morning, I put on the best suit I owned. My wife squeezed my hand as we walked into the courthouse. Across the aisle sat the board members, whispering, smirking, acting like they'd already won. The head of the HOA sat right in front, pink dress again, folder in her lap, eyes locked on me like I was prey. The judge came in. The room went quiet. The HOA's lawyer stood up first, painting me as a selfish man who turned the lake into his personal playground. He talked about chaos and unsafe gatherings. He made it sound like I was running some kind of dangerous carnival by the water. When it was my turn, I stood tall. My voice shook at first, but then it steadied. I told the truth. How I had fished quietly for years without issue. How the HOA suddenly turned it into a crime. How they fined me, threatened me, humiliated me with megaphones and letters. And finally, how I legally bought the lake, fair and square, using the very loopholes they ignored. I told the judge, "Your Honor, I didn't break the rules. I followed the law. And what I do with my own property is my right." The room went silent. The judge leaned back, studying both sides. And then came the moment I'll never forget. He turned to the HOA's lawyer and asked, "Can you provide proof that your association owns this lake?" The lawyer shuffled papers. He hesitated. He tried to spin words. But the truth was clear, they had no proof. Because they didn't own it anymore. I did. The judge dismissed their case. Just like that. The board members froze. Their faces drained of color. The head of the HOA slammed her folder shut, muttering under her breath. I walked out of that courtroom with my head high, my wife at my side, and the weight of the world finally off my shoulders. But winning in court didn't mean the battle was over. No, what came next was even stranger. That night, I came home to find anonymous notes in my mailbox. Nasty notes. Sell the lake or else. You're ruining our community. Some weren't even signed. It was cowardly, and it hurt. At the same time, something else happened. Neighbors I barely knew started showing up at my door. Some with pies, some with handshakes, some with fishing rods in hand. They said things like, "Good job standing up to them," and "We've been waiting for someone to finally fight back." It was like the neighborhood split in two. Half glaring at me, half cheering for me. And right in the middle of it all, me and my lake. I didn't want war. All I wanted was peace. So I decided to take another bold step. I organized a community picnic by the lake. No fines. No rules. No board members telling people what they couldn't do. Just families, food, and fresh air. That Saturday, the dock was alive. Kids laughing, parents chatting, the smell of barbecue drifting across the water. For the first time in a long time, the lake felt like it belonged to the people again. But the HOA didn't stay away. They showed up in the middle of the party, cameras flashing, clipboards out, trying to find violations. One even shouted, "This isn't legal." But nobody listened. People ignored them. Some even laughed. And that was the moment the power shifted. Because when neighbors stop fearing the board, when they start living without looking over their shoulders, the HOA loses its grip. And that day, by the water, I could feel it. The control was slipping out of their hands. Of course, they didn't take it well. They started plotting behind closed doors. I'd hear whispers of secret meetings, angry phone calls, desperate plans. Some said they were trying to pass new rules, others said they wanted to kick me out of the community entirely. But no matter what they did, they couldn't touch the lake. So I sat there on the dock one evening, fishing rod in hand, the sun painting the water gold, and I thought to myself, how far will they go? How desperate will they get, now that they've lost control of the one thing they valued most? And that's what keeps me up at night. Because I know people like them. When they lose power, they don't stop. They just find new ways to fight. So tell me, neighbors, if you were in my shoes, sitting on that dock, knowing the HOA was plotting their next move, would you stay calm and enjoy your victory? Or would you prepare for the storm you know is coming? I thought maybe, just maybe, the storm would calm after the court ruling. I had the law on my side. I had the papers in my hand. The lake was mine, and I believed the board would finally back off. But I was wrong. Instead of surrendering, they grew more desperate. Their anger turned into something darker. And slowly, I began to see just how far they were willing to go. It started small. Late at night, I'd hear cars creeping past my house. Headlights off. Just shadows moving down the street. Once, I stepped outside and saw tire tracks by the edge of my driveway. They were watching me. Then came the vandalism. One morning, I found my mailbox knocked over. A week later, trash dumped at the edge of my yard. At first, I told myself it could be kids messing around, but deep down, I knew. This wasn't random. This was targeted. Still, I refused to bend. I walked to that lake every morning, cast my line, and enjoyed the peace they tried so hard to take away. And every time I did, I knew it made them burn inside. But what they did next went too far. One evening, I hosted another small gathering at the dock. Just a few neighbors, burgers on the grill, kids running around. Suddenly, flashing red and blue lights lit up the water. Police cars rolled up. Officers stepped out, serious faces, hands on their belts. "Sir, we received a call about illegal activity on the lake." Illegal activity? My heart raced. I asked them what they were talking about. They told me someone reported underage drinking, unsafe fires, and even fishing without permits. I looked around. Families. Children with juice boxes. Adults with sodas. A tiny grill with hot dogs sizzling. It was laughable. But it wasn't funny. Because someone had made those calls on purpose. Someone wanted to see me dragged away in handcuffs. The officers checked everything. They found nothing wrong. Before they left, one of them leaned close and said quietly, "Sir, we've had 3 calls like this about you in the last month. Whoever's doing it, they want trouble." I thanked him, but inside, I felt a chill. The HOA wasn't just writing letters anymore. They were weaponizing the system. After that night, I knew I had to be careful. Cameras went up around my property. I saved every letter, every note, every little scrap of evidence they tried to use against me. If they wanted a war, I was ready. But then something unexpected happened. A group of neighbors, the quiet ones who never spoke up before, came to me one Sunday afternoon. They sat with me on the dock and said, "We're tired of this too. We're tired of being pushed around. For the first time, I realized I wasn't alone. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. Others wanted freedom too. They told me stories about being fined for flowers the wrong color, fences an inch too high, even leaving Christmas lights up too long. They'd been bullied for years. And now, seeing me stand up gave them courage. That night, I couldn't sleep. I thought about all those people living in fear, paying money every month just to be harassed by their own board. And it hit me, this wasn't just my story. This was bigger. The next week, we held a meeting at my house. Not an HOA meeting. A real meeting. Neighbors, homeowners, friends. We sat in my living room and shared stories. One by one, people spoke up about how they'd been treated. I saw anger, I saw tears, but most of all, I saw unity. We realized something powerful: the board only had control because people let them. Fear kept everyone silent. But when enough voices spoke together, fear started to fade. The HOA must have caught wind of it, because they came after me even harder. Letters turned into threats. They claimed I was inciting rebellion. They tried to fine me thousands for unauthorized assemblies. They even hinted at foreclosing on my home if I didn't pay. But I wasn't the same man I was when this started. I wasn't afraid anymore. And now, I had backup. Neighbors stood by me. We pushed back together. And here's the truth: once people stop fearing, the bullies lose their power. One evening, as the sun set over the lake, I sat on that dock, fishing rod in my hands, and I realized I had started a movement. What began with one fishing pole had turned into something bigger than I ever imagined. But with every movement comes risk. The more support I gained, the more desperate the board became. And desperate people, they can be dangerous. I still remember one night, lying in bed, hearing a car stop outside my house. A door slammed. Then silence. When I checked the next morning, I found a spray-painted word across my fence: traitor. It stung. But it also fueled me. Because if they had to resort to cowardly acts in the dark, it meant they were losing in the light. And that's when I knew the real fight was just beginning. Now, neighbors, I want to ask you something straight from the heart. If you saw your whole community living in fear of a few bullies with clipboards, would you risk everything to stand up, or would you stay quiet and hope someone else takes the hit? The tension in the neighborhood had reached its breaking point. You could feel it in the air: the stares at the mailbox, the whispers when you walked by, the sense that something was about to explode. And deep down, I knew it. The board wasn't finished with me. They were wounded, embarrassed, but people like that don't disappear quietly. They fight until the last breath. The storm came at the annual HOA meeting. That night, the clubhouse was packed. I could barely find a seat. People who never bothered with meetings before now showed up, angry, curious, ready to see what would happen. At the front, the board sat stiff as statues, faces tight, jaws clenched. You could almost hear their hearts pounding. The head of the HOA slammed the gavel and started talking. Her voice was sharp, almost shaking with rage. This community, she said, is falling apart because of one man. One man who thinks he is above the rules. One man who bought a piece of property not to help, but to destroy. And if we don't stop him now, there will be chaos. All eyes turned to me. I stood slowly. My palms were sweaty, but my voice came out steady. You say I'm destroying this place, but what about the years of bullying? The endless fines? The way you humiliated people over flowers, fences, paint colors? You think that's community? No, that's control. And people here are tired of it. Murmurs rippled through the room. Some nodded. Others looked nervous. The board shifted uncomfortably. I continued: you tried to ban me from fishing. You tried to shame me in front of everyone. You tried to bury me in lawsuits. But I stood up, and I'm still here. And I'm not the only one. Look around. Look at the faces in this room. People are done being silent. That's when it happened. One by one, neighbors stood up. An older man raised his hand and said, "They fined me for a garden bench in my yard." A woman followed, "They threatened me for leaving my Christmas lights up too long." Another added, "They told me to repaint my front door, twice, because the shade of blue wasn't on their approved list." Voices piled on, louder and louder. Complaints poured out. Years of frustration boiling over. The board members sat frozen, unable to control it. For the first time, they weren't the ones holding the power. The head of the HOA banged the gavel, shouting, "Order! Order!" But no one listened. The room was alive with voices, with energy, with rebellion. And then someone shouted, "We want new leadership." The crowd erupted. Applause, cheers, calls for change. It was chaos, but it was beautiful chaos. The board tried to fight it. They argued, they threatened, they warned of consequences. But it was too late. The people had found their voices. And once people speak, you can't silence them again. That night marked a turning point. From then on, the board's power started crumbling. Meetings that used to last 5 minutes with everyone nodding quietly now turned into debates. People questioned decisions. They pushed back on fines. They demanded transparency. The board was losing its grip. Of course, they still came after me. They filed more complaints, spread more rumors, even hinted I was corrupting the neighborhood. But every time they tried to point fingers, more people stood behind me. The lake had become a symbol. Not just of fishing, but of freedom. And as much as I loved that victory, I also felt the weight of it. Because when you become a symbol, you also become a target. I had to watch my back every day. I had to be careful who I trusted. I never knew what trick they might pull next. One evening, I sat on the dock, the water calm, the sky painted with streaks of orange. I thought about everything, the megaphone, the letters, the lawsuits, the vandalism. I thought about the families who now laughed and played at the lake without fear. And I realized something. This wasn't just a fight with an HOA anymore. This was a fight for dignity. For the right to live without being bullied by people who think a clipboard makes them kings. But battles like this, they always have a price. And I had to wonder, how much more was I willing to pay? Because I knew the board wasn't done. Not yet. They had lost control, lost respect, lost the community's trust. And desperate people with nothing left to lose can be dangerous. Still, as I reeled in my line that night, a smile crept across my face. Because no matter what they tried next, one thing would always remain true. The lake was mine. And every ripple across that water reminded me that sometimes, the little guy can win. But here's what I want to know from you, neighbors: if your entire community stood up against the board, voices raised, power shifting, would you join the fight, or would you sit back and watch from the sidelines? The days after that explosive meeting felt different. The neighborhood didn't feel as quiet, as controlled, as it used to. Something had shifted. People walked a little taller. They greeted each other more. They spoke louder about things they once whispered. For the first time in years, the board no longer felt like the voice of the community. But that didn't mean the battle was over. No, the board was furious. They tried to save face. They sent out long letters filled with rules, warnings, even fake reminders of power they didn't have anymore. But the truth was, no one cared. People stopped fearing them. And fear had always been their weapon. I saw it every day at the lake. Families coming out with blankets. Kids running down the grassy bank. Fathers teaching sons how to cast a line. Mothers laughing as they dipped their toes in the water. The board members would drive by, slow and bitter, but they couldn't stop it. The lake was alive again. And me? I had become something I never planned to be. A symbol. A neighbor who fought back. A reminder that the HOA wasn't invincible. People started coming to me for advice, for help, even just for encouragement. One woman knocked on my door with tears in her eyes. She said, I was fined $500 because my roses weren't approved color. I didn't know what to do. But after what you did, I decided not to pay. They backed off. Thank you. Another man told me I stopped trimming my tree every week just to please them. They threatened me, but I told them no. For the first time, I felt free. Hearing those stories gave me a strange mix of pride and sadness. Pride, because people were finally standing up. Sadness, because it took so much suffering for them to realize they had the power all along. But make no mistake, the board still tried to claw back control. They called emergency meetings. They tried to rewrite bylaws. They even sent out a survey asking if the community wanted stricter rules to restore order. The response? Silence. Or laughter. Or notes scribbled in the margins like, "We're done listening to you." The board was crumbling. And then, the final blow came. Several members resigned. They couldn't take the heat, the pressure, the humiliation. The head of the HOA, the one with the pink dress and the megaphone, she stormed out at the last meeting, slamming her papers on the table. She shouted that the neighborhood was ungrateful, that people didn't respect authority anymore, and that she refused to waste her time on people who don't follow the rules. She never came back. Just like that, the empire they built on fear collapsed. It didn't happen overnight, but little by little, the community started healing. The board lost its grip. People stopped worrying about every tiny detail of their lawns, or the color of their doors, or the height of their fences. They started living again. And through it all, the lake remained at the center. Not just a piece of water, but a gathering place. A symbol of what happens when people stand up for themselves. A reminder that no matter how powerful a group seems, they can't control you unless you let them. Sometimes, I sit on that dock, rod in hand, watching the sun melt into the horizon. The water ripples gently, and I think about how far this all went. From a simple morning of fishing, to lawsuits, vandalism, rebellion, and finally, freedom. It still amazes me. One fishing pole started a revolution. But here's the part that stays with me the most. Through all the shouting, the threats, the court battles, the rumors, I learned something important. Community isn't about rules on paper. It's about people. About respect. About letting each other live in peace. The HOA forgot that. They thought community meant control. They thought power meant respect. But power without respect is nothing. It crumbles. It always does. And now, when I walk through the neighborhood, I see smiles instead of scowls. Conversations instead of complaints. People enjoying their homes instead of fearing letters in their mailboxes. Sometimes, neighbors still joke with me. They say, "Careful, don't fish too much, or you'll have to buy another lake." We laugh, but deep down, they know what it meant. They know what it cost. Do I regret it? No. Not for 1 second. The fight was hard. It was messy. It was exhausting. But it was worth every moment. Because now, when I cast my line into that lake, I don't just catch fish. I catch freedom. And freedom, my friends, is priceless. So tell me, neighbors, after hearing my story, do you believe standing up to bullies is always worth the risk? Or do you think sometimes it's better to stay quiet and keep the peace?